Okay, and we are live for episode 242 of Trek Live on Super Bowl Sunday. How we doing?
Doing good. Excited for the day, obviously, but also excited to stop in and talk about Star Trek before we get all sports ball and stuff later
Yeah,
on. So I'm excited for it.
yeah, me too. We feel like this is a good time to be kind of thinking Discovery, kinds of adjacent things. We're not talking about Discovery per se today, but with the fifth and final season kind of on the horizon, there were some false starts this week about maybe the premiere date. Looked like maybe April 4th, not quite sure yet. I kind of have a feeling because the Super Bowl is on CBS. Maybe there will be some sort of promo today. Um,
Hopefully,
and maybe in that's where they'll drop that if that April 4th is true or if it's a different date. But with that so close and kind of looming pretty large right now, we're going to spend some time today looking at the last seasons of the wrapped finished Star Trek shows that Discovery is about to kind of join. Um, Talk about each just for a few minutes. Maybe put up some rankings of how we kind of stack those 6 seasons, um, and maybe if there are any lessons to take away from successes, less successful final seasons. It's kind of hard though. I mean, some of these shows, most of them knew going in that they were shooting their last season. Um, Discovery kind of didn't. Um, so it's going to make it a unique situation with these when you look at them comparatively. Like I don't know how fair it is necessarily to compare like TNG or DS9's final season with what we're going to get with Discovery, just because they knew going in and we're kind of planning to wrap at the end of 7 seasons. Even Enterprise, which was canceled, I think they knew going into season 4, by all accounts, that they were, preparing to wrap. Um,
yeah. There were rumblings a year earlier, right,
yes,
for Enterprise.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they kind of barely got that 4th season, so they knew. So while it wasn't like definitively yes, this is it, like we're planned, contracts are ending, we're done. They kind of were preparing accordingly. Where Discovery, all the basic interviews we've heard so far make it sound like they weren't necessarily. I think each season of Discovery, maybe with the exception of the second, ends at a place where there is some finality because it's kind of wrapping a big story that maybe if you could if the rug got pulled out from under them, there was some semblance of finality to it. It wouldn't feel like it's ending on a cliffhanger or anything like that. So I think Discovery is kind of structured in a way that probably will hopefully lend itself to having a fairly final ending even without all that planning, just because of the way that they build season arcs and things like that. But that all remains to be seen. We're going to be tackling that as the show airs and as that last season gets here. But it's got last seasons on the brain for sure. I'm watching. You just finished TNG season 7. I'm in the middle of
yeah.
DS9 season 7. So these final seasons are kind of looming large right now. So that's what we're going to do today.
And to me, it's just like it's an impossible task to end the show that has
Yeah.
such, and especially that's a part of this really great franchise. I think it's like it's already trying to tackle that's something that's impossible. Like it's nobody's is generally happy for a show to end,
Yeah.
except for some of the Star Trek haters out there. But I think that Discovery, there's always drama with a Star Trek show ending, and this feels like no different than
Yeah.
that. You know, I think that they were hoping for another season, but it looks like they went in another direction. But I think just to frame a mind, like I'm going into it like they're tackling an impossible task.
Yeah.
So um, there will be some um, I will give them like
Some
benefit of the
grace.
doubt and some
Yeah.
grace some stuff because it sounds like they had to do some reshoots and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But yeah, but there's also some things that we can learn from some of these other seasons that I think are just kind of interesting to talk about, and I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah. Me too. Uh, Before we get into all that, though, as we always do, rewatch recap. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about season 7 of DS9 here because we're going to talk about it as a more collective whole, broader thoughts. Where I'll work in some things like I recently watched X, Y, or Z. Um, but before we get into you, I'll just say Voyager season 5, up to the point where I am, is really, really great. One of my favorite seasons of Star Trek. Uh, really well balanced. I think they're character heavy stories, but they have like a cinematic scope to them. I think when Brandon Braga took over as the showrunner for Voyager, if you dig into some of his interviews and things he's talked about with that show, that was I feel like a big um, driving force behind his show running approach to Voyager, kind of giving it a sense of scale and being ambitious with the science fiction ideas and the ambitious nature of some of the stories. You think of Timeless, you think of 30 Days, even Bride Chaotica, like just really ambitious swings of the bat that I think are really successful in large part. And I feel like it's like the best version of Voyager. I really feel like this part of the show is where it's kind of cooking on all cylinders for me. A run like Counterpoint, Latent Image, Bride Chaotica, Gravity. I just watched. That's a really strong run. I love Nothing Human. I've watched 3 that I would put like in the upper tier of Voyager episodes this season so far with Jerome, Timeless, and Counterpoint. I think they're all A's. You know, in the conversation for top 5, top 10 episodes of the series. I would say so. Yeah, I love this portion of Voyager, and it's the peak for me.
which is incredible because that's 5 years in, and
Yeah,
so that's kind of not. I mean, Discovery's not five
yeah,
years in. It's a little bit different in production schedule. It's like
yes.
7 years in.
7
It
years
feels
in,
like,
really. Yeah,
but no, it's just incredible that that run in Voyager is really legendary for sure.
yeah. I just all the characters get big episodes. I think they spread the wealth pretty well. You know, um, Tuvok's really great in Gravity. I think that's an episode that's like grown on me pretty substantially over the years. I think the location photography, the Tuvok Nas relationship just feel big and important and revealing. And that last scene in Gravity in the transporter room where Tuvok mind melds with her to like let her in on the Vulcan secret, and it's done with no dialogue. It's just such a classic Star Trek to me. Like throwback to the original series, Spock. You could see that playing out in a similar fashion, and this has like a unique spin on it. It's Tuvok, not Spock, and it's Voyager, not the original series, but it's familiar yet new. I just think it like finds that balance of new, but calling back to what made people fall in love with this in the first place. All kind of working together. So yeah, big fan of this run of Voyager, and I really have nothing negative to say. I think there've been no misses. Some episodes better than others, of course, for my money, but even the lesser ones have a lot to chew on, a lot of interesting components, and yeah, really digging it. Where are you? What's going on with?
So I didn't watch anything this week, but last week I got into Context is for Kings and finished
Great.
it, and it's man that episode is maybe a topic for a bigger topic for another day, but I'll try to keep this brief. But it's people say it's like a soft reboot for the show. It feels like a hard reboot almost because the premiere, those first 2 episodes, it feels almost night and day.
Yeah, very, very different.
And I will say that I want to make this clear that I originally said that I hadn't seen some of these episodes in since 2017, and so Context is for Kings is not one of those episodes.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've seen maybe for a Trek After Dark or something like that. I have seen that episode since, but still, it still is, if not better than I remember it. Anytime I return to that episode, so I always look for, at least early on, like, can I tell that he's not from this universe?
Mhm.
And so it's I think just really good, and like I said, a hard reboot for the show. Um, Even though it's one of those episodes that I have seen before, but man, it's really good, and I'm excited to keep moving on to the Butcher's Knife and some of these other later episodes that I haven't
That
seen.
you haven't seen. Yeah.
Um, so maybe a little bit more extensive update when I get into some of those episodes. But again, I can't say enough about context. It's
Yeah.
really good.
That's one of Discovery's best episodes, I think, no doubt about it. I think I've talked about it many times as it's come up in the past, but like the way that it puts you in Michael Burnham's head, and like the way you see the ship and the other people on the ship uh, through this sort of like disconnected, mysterious lens, like just the way the episode's shot, I think, really makes you feel like you're her. You're seeing it through her eyes, and you're experiencing the ship for the first time, not as a familiar place. It's so shrouded in shadow and mystery. Like, what is Black Alert? Like, what are we doing? What is this? What is going on the ship? And who are these people? It really feels like it's as successful as Star Trek has ever been, with like the truly making you feel like a fish out of water. And like Star Trek has done that many times with creative ways of like bringing people back to the past and putting them out of time and out of in weird situations. But this is such a unique way of doing it, and I think the way the episode is constructed and shot gives that first person kind of experience better than anything that I've ever seen Star Trek been able to do, be able to do. So one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek as a whole, and certainly one of Discovery's best, given everything you said too about like the premiere. The 2 episode kind of twofer at the beginning is kind of its own thing, and then Context is for Kings is like sort of the pilot in in all but name only. It introduces Tilly and Stamets and Lorca and the ship, and it's really the show. I mean, this is the show that it's going to be, more so than the opener. But just loads of great scenes. It's unexpected, like the way it evolves into the stuff on the Glen, where it turns into like a classic Star Trek horror episode,
Yeah.
a haunted house kind of a vibe, where you think you're going in and being afraid of Klingons, and you're not afraid of Klingons. You're afraid of something very different.
Yeah.
The twists and turns, and I think that last scene in the engineering bay with Lorca and Burnham is like an all timer, where you get the Context is for Kings quote, and the it's great. It's great. It's an all timer, and I'm really interested to see. Like, I knew you had seen that. That's one of the few Discovery episodes that we have like rewatched together. Outside of like the first run, and it'll be interesting to see you dive into some episodes that you really truly haven't seen in 5-6 years now. So
Yeah, because it's just like it's so good, and that like I feel like there's a lot of bright scenes just in the first 2 episodes. Like they're in the desert, it's really bright.
Yeah.
The two areas are obviously really bright, but then you go like this like away mission on the Glen. It's like so dark. It's like it is complete 180.
Yeah.
So it's really good.
Agreed. All right. I think we've covered our rewatches pretty well, and I think we should dive into just spending a few minutes on each of the final seasons of Star Trek shows that are completed. I just think it's kind of hard to believe. Like, when I finish this rewatch I'm on, Picard and Discovery will both be like completed entities, which is just a kind of a weird thing. Like, they will be just like Deep Space Nine and Enterprise and these other shows that are like done. They are what they are. There's nothing else coming, and that's a big deal. I feel like this is an important thing to kind of look at, think about as we head into this big last season of Discovery. I guess TOS is a unique animal too, just because of the structure of that show. It's not as concerned with like wrapping up storylines and characters. It's not doing the same things that the Next Generation onward are kind of trying to do. It's essentially, the same formula as the first 2 seasons, with some different decision makers in play that manifests itself on screen. You can tell the difference in some ways, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the fact that it's a last season. Maybe you can talk yourself into like, well, kind of it is because maybe people were leaving knowing the writing was on the wall, and that's why it looks and feels a little different. Money cuts because it was going to be a last season led to these things, but really in the meat and potatoes of it mostly feels like the same show with some different people cooking the ingredients. Season 3 of TOS to me is a mixed bag. We've covered this. I don't want to harp on too many of the old talking points that we've definitely batted around in sort of recent shows, but a lot of really good moments, some underrated things. I think people fall into a trap of kind of dismissing the third season as a collective whole and maybe missing out on things like Day of the Dove and the Enterprise incident and All Our Yesterdays, Tholian Web. I think there are really good gems in there that have kind of stood the test of time as really rock solid, important pieces of Star Trek. But of course, yeah. I mean, it's I think a less successful season than the first two. I don't think many people would argue with that, right?
Yeah, I think it's tough with that because I think we're going to see a lot of similarities in people's perspective on seasons of how they start and how they end. And I think some of these seasons, especially TOS, rocky start, rocky ending. The thing that's tough about TOS is like it has the movies.
Yeah.
So
that
like
feel more like the finale.
That feel more like the finale, and so like when I watch it, it changes. I think my perspective on it because I don't necessarily like similar to Jim Morehouse. I think that the movies aren't really like its own entity. It's just longer episodes, and so it's really hard for me to separate those two. And so I think my perspective on the season will always change just because I didn't have obviously didn't grow up first run or seeing the reruns that got a lot of people. So at least my perspective is that again the movies I think really takes some of the weight off a little bit of that season.
They do.
And then also in typical Star Trek fashion, I think people's perspective on the season is really heavily on how it starts and how it ends. So those are the 2 points for me.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, if you're watching it in air date order, it's starting with Spock's brain and ending with Turnabout Intruder. That has to.
Yeah,
I'm sure it does. It colors some perspectives on it. But yeah, I even TNG, it kind of has gotten more complicated, I think, as well, with seeing continuations of these characters through the movies and Picard. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but certainly with TOS, because of the 6 movies, kind of in a sense almost having like a continuing story, and that really does sort of function as if it's like the last season of that show in all but name. So that just
the chunks are 2 hours instead of
it's
it's really hard, especially like you said, the continuing story throughout, like the story thread throughout these movies is they're really linked together. So it honestly feels like a modern era Star Trek
season.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
They just age a lot faster.
They do. Yeah. True. But it really does, like you said, kind of take away some of the impact of maybe some of the misses of season 3 and the fact that it's not like we're trying to wrap up and give some finality. Like you don't get that in season 3 of the original series, but you do get it in Star Trek's 2, 3, 4, and 6. Really, like that have some, maybe eye on that. I definitely agree with that. I think that makes the original series one of the many things that makes it a unique animal, and not just Star Trek as a collective thing, but in TV kind of history. So that it has its run, it's 3 seasons, it's 79 episodes, but it's also got these.
Something went wrong. Please try again.
By the way, the mic's off. To turn it back on, slide the switch on the back.
So what it sounds like is that we should have a Discovery movie then, is what you're saying. Because I don't know. I think the movies do soften the blow a little bit. I think if we did have, if I'm looking at this objectively, if we just had season 3 event of the original series, like it would be a worse season.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I would agree. I think
but Discovery's not getting canceled per se. It's just, I don't know. It's a weird thing.
yeah, I think it's still to be determined how we're going to react to the Discovery thing. I think how well they pull off making it feel final and feel satisfying, and how well it functions as a last season, not just a fifth season, is going to really loom large as we go into this and as it wraps up, and how it fits into what we're going to be talking about at the end here when we put up our ranks, and how well it fits into that discussion. Like, is it going to feel more like this season 3 of TOS, or is it going to feel more like season 7 of DS9, where it feels like some finality's going on there? Yeah, so TOS is definitely a unique animal. I think it does do some cool things structurally. Like, I think it involves Scotty maybe a little more than the first 2 seasons do. If you look at like the episodes kind of as a whole, I think he's more featured maybe, which is a cool individual element of that season. You know, it's got a different cinematographer for a chunk of it, so it has a little bit of a different visual flair to it. There's some unique camera choices. I'm thinking of, I think it's in the For the World's Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky, there's a really cool shot of them coming down a staircase where the camera's like at the bottom of the steps looking up at them. Like, just there's stuff like that I don't think you would have seen in the first couple of seasons. More maybe flexy and self-aware camera choices that give it a unique flavor, I guess, as an individual season. But I think the big thing to really tackle here in this kind of conversation is what we covered with the lack of finality, but the sort of answer to that being the first 6 movies. Yeah. TNG is a similar kind of anomalous one in the sense that, you just watched it. Unlike some of these other shows that we're going to talk about in a minute, they knew going into TNG that it was going to be the last season, but they knew they were going to jump right into filming Generations, and that they couldn't. Certainly, unlike Deep Space Nine, which was concerned with things like wrapping the characters up, sending them off into doing some new things, different things, providing real finality in that way. TNG kind of couldn't do that. It was kind of handcuffed in a sense that, All Good Things as a series finale couldn't do anything truly lasting to these characters because they were coming back, like, immediately. They knew what the future was going to hold with the movies and a continuing thing. And you get those movies, and then you get Picard, which we'll, again, talk about again in a bit. So how does that kind of impact the 7th season of TNG, and what are kind of maybe some of your takeaways, having just kind of lived it in your rewatch?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's hard to put like a Deep Space Nine really element of finality to it. I think there is some really like special final moments, more like focused on the future and what it could be and so I think they do a really good job of that. But I think they do some interesting like final moments with some of the side characters and stuff in season 7 that kind of feel semi-final until we get to Picard, obviously. But no, I think there's I don't know, some really wholesome ending to it, but I don't I think the choice to focus on kind of what the future could be feels like a very sentimental moment. And I think that anytime you end anything, there is some like just some feelings towards it. And so I think they do a really good job of kind of addressing what the future could be and kind of playing up this, like, typical Star Trek, like the future is unknown, and what you decide to do with it is kind of up to you and how you want to write it. So I think it just does a strong. That's one way to
Huh.
end a series like that. So again, it's these first two shows are really an anomaly because they have the movies to kind of back them up. So
Yeah.
um, it's not typically the final time we see these characters, so it's hard. Again, this is another, but I think they do a good job of really addressing that kind of emotional side of things and how special moments together, um, the, how special some of these moments are with this crew and at this time. So I think they do a good job of really talking about the future, but also living in the moment with kind of that end scene in the poker room. So I think it's really good ending. I think. I don't even know if I can call it an ending. It's just a really good episode. So yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, seasons 3 of TOS and season 7 of TNG are like they share that DNA where it's the last time you see these characters together in that place in that time in their lives, but it's not the last time you see these characters together or individually. We're gonna double back to all of these people, and they're still going to be together. They're still going to be doing basically the same things, but it's the last time we're like with them in that like succinct, kind of day to day kind of place. So they share that. TNG season 7. I think the big calling card there that we've talked about is it feels like they made a very conscious choice to spend time kind of knowing that they couldn't wrap things up in that kind of final way. Maybe the other thing they wanted to do was to like build some backstory and to dive into like family ties and where these people come from. We get to meet parents and grandparents and siblings and things that are alluded to maybe over the course of the last 6 seasons but aren't seen. You hear Geordi talk about his parents being in Starfleet. You hear Worf talk about his foster brother over the course of the show. You hear Dr. Crusher talk about her life growing up on colonies off Earth and things like that, but you don't see any of that really. And season 7 does kind of make it its kind of unique individual mission to do that. A lot of these episodes focus heavily on these things. So, and to some mixed results, of course, but I think it's kind of cool that season has that as sort of a unique element and an interesting choice, an interesting thing to do in that last grouping of episodes, to give these characters even more juice going into the sort of next phase, being at the time knowing that it was going to be features. Couldn't have predicted Picard back in 94, 93, 94, but knowing these characters are going to keep moving forward in different ways and kind of imbuing them with even more substance as far as that stuff goes. What happened to them before the Enterprise? Where do they come from? And what are their... TNG is very much about this group of people who are all kind of orphans in a sense. Like they all kind of come from broken families and, a lot of them, you hear them talk about being... having lost parents or, coming from difficult places, right? And, because that does kind of loom so large over the show, I think it's a worthwhile venture to dive into that a little bit, or at least try to get to the more of the core of why that is and where people are coming from.
Yeah, it's like almost the transformation from like workplace kind of day-to-day stuff in TNG to like found family. It's like
right.
you saw like this turn in the franchise of like more like a more emphasis on like the found family. Yes, because then you get like it explodes in Deep Space Nine and Voyager.
Yes.
So I think there's I think you're right. I think there is definitely like a switch from like these are just work colleagues to like, okay, these people matter to me. So yeah, it's a pretty cool arc, I guess. Not just in season 7, obviously, but you see it throughout the show. So
yeah,
it's a really great point.
Yep. DS9 season 7. I'm watching now. It's a really interesting season. I think they're juggling a lot. They're in watching it right now. I mean, there are a lot of things that you can tell that they're like consciously teeing up for decisions that are going to be made at the very end. I just watched an episode of Chimera with the J.G. Hertzler playing one of the 100, the kind of lost changeling who has his own experiences. Is not a founder, has no connection to the Dominion in any way, but can relate to Odo in a unique way, in a way that the founders can, and that creates some conversations and some perspectives about where Odo comes from and what he wants to do and why he's not with the founders. And I think those things become really important in the finale. And I think there are several of these things that kind of play out over the course of the season. But the big thing that kind of looms over the season, I think, in a sense, outside of some of the show's control, was the reacting to the Terry Farrell departure and the what to do with that, with bringing in Ezri Dax and establishing her as part of the ensemble and kind of building that up. Takes time. And I like right before Chimera, what I just experienced was the 3-episode run of Prodigal Daughter, The Emperor's New Cloak, and Field of Fire, which are 3 really Ezri heavy episodes in a row. Sort of. The Emperor's New Cloak is mirror Ezri, which is not my favorite thing, but 3 episodes that spend a lot of time diving into who she is and kind of establishing, Nicole DeBoer's cred as an actress, and she's very good. I mean, it's nothing against her. It's nothing against even the character. It's just it creates this kind of funky feeling at times throughout the season, where Deep Space Nine is so ensemble heavy and so shares the wealth so effectively for the bulk of that run, where it people talk about Voyager kind of turning into the 7 show at times, and even when that's true on Voyager, I'm not sure it ever goes as heavy into one character as at points DS9 season 7 does into Ezri, which is I don't think it's talked about a whole lot, but it certainly makes it a unique season, even outside of the obvious things of wrapping up so many serialized stories and long running character development threads. It does do all of those things and does them very, very well. It like right now, about halfway through the season, the 2 arcs that like stand up to me the most are Ezri, and like the things that loom largest in my head, like when I think of the season, it's Ezri and it's Nog. It's Nog getting his leg blown off in the Siege of AR-558, and It's Only a Paper Moon dealing with that. Like they're the 2 kind of ongoing threads that feel big. And Nog is a very important, very successful, incredible, recurring though character, and Ezri is brand new this season, and so that's just a unique, flavor that season 7 of Deep Space Nine kind of brings. So,
yeah, I talked at the top of the show about impossible tasks. An impossible task is bringing in a new character for this final season.
For the final season,
And so I just think that, I think Ezri's trying to find herself mirrored to Sisko's trying to find himself. He's in show. I feel like the show's trying to find itself. It's just like that's a tall order to recast, to go that route. I don't want to play what ifs, but I think we did a great episode.
We did
a Daxless season 7.
Yeah.
And I almost think it might have been a little bit more successful because it's not. I just think it's an impossible task.
Just takes up so much real estate.
Yeah, it's not it's not it's not necessarily the showrunners. Well, maybe, but it's also not so much the production or the actress or anything like that. It's just that's a really tall order to do, especially on when we're such an ensemble. It's just the fallout of the Dax character was such a chain reaction to some of these other characters.
Well,
Worf
yes.
just falls apart, and then it's like Julian and O'Brien's job to
Yes.
kind of pick him back up. So it's like chain reactions throughout the whole show.
Yes.
And so it's just really tough to kind of
And I think
put
that's
together a good season.
for sure. And I think that's probably what was alluring about it. Like, it's one thing to introduce. You said it, and you're right. Like, tall order to bring in a new character for the last season of a show and like try to inject that into the ensemble. But Deep Space Nine is as good as any show ever, I think, at injecting new characters. Like, new characters are constantly kind of coming and going, and recurring facets and guest stars who come back. And it's, to me, it's not even necessarily like that. It's just a new character. It's what you just said. It's a new character, but it's also an old character. Like, it's a new character that demands
So yeah,
so much of a reaction
character, yeah.
that it's a struggle for the other characters in a dramatically interesting way to like assimilate this person, like to bring them into the fold. Like, it's complicated for Worf, it's complicated for O'Brien, it's complicated for Cisco to interact with Ezri and to make heads or tails of Ezri. And I think that was probably dramatically enticing to the writers as like, ooh, we're always looking for like interesting, cool things to chew on and to put these characters through the ringer with. Like, that does it. I mean, it definitely gives Worf a whole big dramatic, arc to play with in the seventh season, with how to react to Ezri and how to, how to interact. But I think the negative side of that is that it just consumes so much real estate that I think it can swallow up time and real estate that could. I kind of like you. I play the what if game, like in an alternate universe where they chose something differently. Like, I try to imagine what they could have done with that time and how they could have served other characters, and probably still could have achieved some of the same interesting things with dealing with the loss of Jadzia Dax. Like, you can still do that without bringing in another Dax to force different kinds of reactions. So season 7 is such an up and down. There's also, you can't. The other thing that really looms large, especially as we get into that last run of episodes, is that Dukat. Yeah, the treatment of Dukat, and that leaves people hot and cold. Like, some of the decisions that get made with how his character is handled with the power wraiths and kind of going
cult leader.
Yeah, in Covenant.
Goes off the rails in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people feel that way. I think a lot of people miss the Dukat of the bulk of the show, where he's this calculating, political, guy at the top of the food chain, or struggling to stay at the top of the food chain in the Cardassian Empire, as opposed to this kind of rogue actor who is mentally unbalanced, and he's more of a broad stroke villain in season 7 than he was in prior seasons. And I think for a lot of people that makes him less interesting, and I'm kind of on that team as well. I think there are some interesting things that they do with him. I think they bring it around at the end, and have some satisfying moments, like right at the end in the finale. But I do think it damages the character a little bit. So it's frustrating. I mean, in one sense, I'm impressed by season 7 because it is juggling so many things. I think the episode Treachery, Faith in the Great River, the way that deals with Weyoun and who the Vorta are and how they view things, and how Odo interacts with him at Weyoun and gives Jeffrey Combs such big, important things to do. Like, that tees up so many things. That the way they kind of softly introduce, like, the changelings are sick, like something's going on there, and it just kind of leaves that hanging for a long time before we come back around to it. And it uses the Section 31 thread that's kind of softly introduced in the prior season to weave into that. Like, there's great stuff in season 7. I think what they do with Kor in the Klingon episode, to send him off and give Worf and Martok like an interesting episode where they're kind of at odds. Like, there's great stuff. Siege of AR 558 is as good as any episode of Star Trek has ever been with showing that side of war. Like, Star Trek spends a lot of time with guys tapping on consoles in battles and dealing with these action sequences that way. Where
we never go in the trenches,
right? We're kind of separated from that a lot of the time. We might hear about it. We know O'Brien did it as like a younger man, and we hear about it, but getting to see it, getting to see our characters live with that in such a brutal way. Like season 7's loaded with great stuff. I think those first couple episodes are good. With the blockade that Kira and Odo do to dealing with the Romulans as new allies who are not entirely trustworthy, and we don't know what to make of them. And there's great stuff, but it's also battling against itself a little bit with, I think where it takes some of these choices that it made. So
Yeah, I agree. I think there's just a lot. There's a culmination of a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
Some of it really good, and then some of it just
throws a little bit.
Drags the season down. And talk about endings. Like it still pains me to this day, but like the Jake Sisko ending, like that's just that. That is a tough one to swallow. And that whole Sisko arc, like how that ends, I think is mixed bag for me.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
I think this one definitely has some. It feels more final than the other shows,
definitely.
And so, I think we get a little bit of stuff in the documentary, but this one feels probably as final as any of the shows, because with Voyager, we can move on to that now, but
yeah,
like you get some Prodigy stuff that I think softens the blow a little bit. But I also think in that season, we'll get into it. But,
let's get into it. There's a couple more things I want to say about Deep Space Nine, but we'll do that at the end, as like there are some pseudo lessons or things to take, at least maybe that I have in mind going into season 5 of Discovery. But we'll double back to that at the end. Voyager season 7. I know you're not a huge Endgame guy, and that's just one episode. That's the finale. But one of the calling cards of this season is certainly the choice to structurally build the season in a way that leads to that happening at the very end of the last episode. Like that was the decision they made, to make it about the journey.
Yep.
And that the show's been about the journey the whole time, and about this found family living together, working to that goal, and that's where the show ends. Like that's a structural choice that we can agree or disagree with, but that's kind of, to me, maybe the whole ballgame with this season. There are other smaller things that I definitely want to touch on, but how does that kind of sit with you as a big Voyager fan? Like,
yeah, I'm a big fan, and look, we get some tastes of it. We get like they connect with Starfleet, earlier before that, and they get like a soft kind of reunited. But,
it's more regular in that 7th season. They're kind of more in communication.
Yeah, and there's some really good final episodes of some final characters that I really enjoy, but I think for Voyager, I think your opinion on season 7, and to a certain extent the show as a whole, really hinges on the aspect of like, can you get on board of like, Harry Kim's thing about the journey, or like what interesting stuff we could have done with not just even one episode. Give me like a 3 to 5. See like and see like some of these characters, and I think we could have done some really interesting things, final things with some of these characters. I think that's my biggest takeaway from this season, is like, creatively, your opinion on the episode hinges on that, I think.
Right.
And I think, some of your, and how you just view the show, I think that's just how, that's the pressure that a season, a last season deals with.
Yes.
Is the perspective of the rest of the entire show. So,
right. These decisions matter a lot, and they impact the whole
big
thing.
time. And it's scary because, like, when I hear this casual thing, like, well, we gotta recall some of these actors and creatives to reshoot some stuff for Discovery. That's scary. So, but for Voyager, I think, the decision to go that way is fine. It's what they did. I think they did some interesting things in the season, and I think that they had to do something more final, because Deep Space Nine didn't get the movies. I don't know if Voyager was set to get a Voyager movie. I think, and so I think they had to swing big for the final episode.
Mhm.
But to say that the last episode isn't all bad, it's not all bad. There's some really great moments with Admiral Paris. Like we get some really
Yeah.
good payoffs.
Yeah.
But it is only 2 hours, so it's just tough to kind of
Yeah.
quantify the ending of the show.
I think that the suddenness of the return home is a really complicated ball of wax for people. Like it, I agree that the show is about the journey. I think the show makes no bones about that. I think that becomes the strength of the show. It's the found family element, and I can be sold on that for sure. But I think as a credit to the cast, I care so much about them by the end. Like I want to see Kate Mulgrew playing Janeway reuniting and getting home and talking to Starfleet. I want to see Robert Beltran play Chakotay dealing with the fallout of the Maquis stuff, and Roxanne Dawson played B'Elanna doing that. I want to see the moments that have been teed up over the course of the 7 seasons because the characters are successful and the actors are so good. The things that you know are coming. But I get also, like, I think it's one of those things that I'm sure they felt like we can't have our cake and eat it too, no matter what they did, unless they brought them home like with 6 episodes to go, which of course I think in hindsight, many of us that are so in love with the show would have preferred. We would like to spend 6 episodes on Earth and just kind of watching them live life and acclimate back to being in the Alpha Quadrant, and maybe showing that it's not all it's cracked up to be in some senses. Like it brings complications that maybe they didn't see coming. Like wanting it is one thing, but like now that you're home and you have these things hitting you in the face, like what do you do? But like I think to an extent, unless you were willing to do that, which I don't think the show ever was. I just don't think they were gonna do that. Like bringing them home with like an act left at the end of kind of what. Skipping ahead a little bit, I think one of the brave things that like the finale of Picard does is it kind of leaves a whole act at the end of the last episode to kind of just sit around the characters, and I think that was a good choice. That's what I think Voyager needed, but I think they were afraid that there's not enough time. We're going to allude to things, and it's not going to be satisfying, and people are just going to want more, and it's not, kind of damned if we do, damned if we don't. And they chose to lean into it's about the journey. They've achieved the goal. That's it. That's the end. They got there. And to kind of end it on that emotional, like, whoa of here we are. It's a tough one, though. I really do. I wish there were different decisions made that gave just a little more breathing room to let us see some of those things. I think it would have been more emotionally satisfying. I also think season 7 of Voyager, some behind the scenes stuff. Brandon Braga was the showrunner I just talked about during the rewatch recap. That he brought this like ambitious big science fiction idea meshed with character story, kind of identity to the show in the 5th and 6th season. Ken Biller was the showrunner in season 7, and I almost feel like you can see the show kind of settle into a little bit of a different vibe. Like the big ambitious science fiction ideas maybe aren't as prominent in season 7, and the thing that actually, if you look at the episodes in season 7, for me, it almost feels more of like a throwback to the original series. You get episodes like Critical Care, which is about healthcare. They're more message shows. They're like maybe a little more preachy, a little more. You get Workforce parts 1 and 2 about like being in the cog of the capitalist kind of thing, and you get Repentance, which is about capital punishment. Like you get these like message shows that are kind of classic True Blue, old school original series, TNG kinds of things Gene Roddenberry would like be all about talking about, right? So I think season 7 does sort of have a shift in tone and a shift in identity in terms of the kinds of stories that it was telling, which is interesting and its own thing. Kind of in the real sense of Voyager. I mean, Deep Space Nine is all about the ongoing, long-running story arcs and the serialized elements kind of wrapping up. Voyager all along has been kind of these episodic stories with some serialization kind of softly running through with some of the character development, but very isolated kinds of episodes, and I think the kind of approach to that changes a bit as the course of the show goes on, and season 7 is no different. So, yeah. Enterprise season 4 is another whole ball of wax. I mean, kind of.
Yeah.
We kind of covered it at the beginning. They obviously kind of knew coming in that this was it. It wasn't formally like, oh, this is our last season. Contractually, we've known all along. For like that it was not that, but they certainly knew, by all accounts, going into the beginning of that 4th season, that this was probably going to be all she wrote. And I think the show was built in a sense. The season was built in a sense to kind of accommodate that. In a lot of ways, very, very notable. I think anybody who knows Enterprise knows, like, the big calling card of season 4 is the mini arcs, the 3-part stories, the
Right after a monster arc.
right after
too.
a monster arc. Yeah,
Yeah, it's just like, yeah.
Talk about Voyager kind of shifting tones and like the style.
Yeah,
Enterprise is kind of 3 shows. If you
It's
look
like
at
a
it,
whiplash. Yeah.
yeah, you look at seasons 1 and 2 of Enterprise are its own thing, kind of old school, very Voyager TNG style, individual stories. Season 3 is its own thing. That's more like Discovery, really like a season story. And then season 4 is a completely different thing. It certainly has like an overarching thing with kind of the slow walk towards the founding of the Federation and the more, not earthbound, but like local solar system kind of activities, stuff going on around Earth and Vulcan and the Andoria and that kind of stuff, with these mini arcs that are like little mini Enterprise movies, really. These 3-episode like extended stories. How do you think that sits and kind of meshes with all this and with Enterprise as a whole?
Yeah, I like it. I think similarly, I think there's like some truth to, like, again, I keep harkening back to like how a season starts and how it ends, and so I think there's definitely some ups and downs.
Yeah.
Through the season, and then how that's kind of executed, I guess, for again how the show ends, obviously. But I think there's, again, I think similar to Voyager, I think the change in guard and kind of ever revolving door of some of the showrunners coming back and that writer's room, and I think there's definitely some ups and downs to that. So
Yeah.
I always like the back half of really Enterprise, seasons 3 and 4. I think again, I don't think this ends well. I think this, again, 2 shows in a row, I think don't really end well for my money, but I do think the season as a whole does some really cool things and some really interesting things, because I think I think it really, to some extent, finds the balance of really what Strange New Worlds has really found. It's like, it feels episodic, but there's also this like really overarching arc, and I think they do some of it in season 4, and I think it's can be really successful. Yeah, up and down season for me, but I think it ends tragically.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to Voyager season 7. Yeah, the way that that last episode looms really heavy, and it almost becomes impossible to talk about season 4 of Enterprise without like quickly looking at These Are the Voyages, which is a shame. It's definitely, because it's more than that. I mean, it's 22 episodes. That's one of them. It's the last one, and it's a big one, but it's, yeah. I love the format of it. I love the mini arcs. I think the ability to tell these bigger stories that lead to more, that add credence to like Enterprise's importance as a show and as a cast. Like, these characters kind of moving us toward the founding of the Federation and teeing up the Star Trek that's going to come after chronologically. I think like the Vulcan arc, those 3 episodes, the one that features Shran so heavily with the Andorians and the Romulans playing subterfuge, trying to bring division to those planets. Instead, it's kind of having the opposite effect. I think that stuff's really important, not just for Enterprise, but for Star Trek as a whole. When you think about like the bigger picture of the Federation and how it all works, and Enterprise is kind of Enterprise season 4 kind of adds a ton of color to that, and makes that such a more like tangible thing, and we kind of know where it comes from and what those events look like. I think it found the right balance, which I think a lot of these newer shows have kind of been dealing with too, like the right balance of serialized stuff, like the character threads kind of running through these other stories, like finding a way to have their cake and eat it too, to use that phrase again. Like they can do these very different kinds of stories without giving back the serialized stuff. They can have both. They can tell big, long stories that matter for the characters. Things have consequences and continue to manifest in later episodes, while still kind of bouncing around the universe and having different tones and styles. I think Enterprise season 4 found a really interesting way to do that. Yeah. Rob in the chat says his partner watched Enterprise for the first time a few years ago, and she was shocked at the season 4 finale, as in it came out of nowhere and seemed unnecessary. It was interesting seeing it through the newbie's eyes. Absolutely. I think that's what I felt when I first saw it. Came out of nowhere and feels like it's coming from a different era of the show, which it kind of was. I think the Manny Koto, different perspective in the writer's room, driving the bulk of season 4, kind of up until that second to last episode, and then having the finale written by the folks who were writing the show prior to this season, feels like out of nowhere. It's what makes it feel like, whoa, what did the guys who wrote These Are the Voyages watch season 4? I don't know. I still don't know. And that matters a lot. It doesn't feel like they did. And I think that hurts it as well. But season 4 of Enterprise, I think, is very successful. Very, very successful. Really strong season, and a big calling card for Enterprise being, I think, evolving into, and I think growing into being a pretty successful Star Trek show. In the years after it's been kind of away, I think season 4 really makes that a reality. And to kind of finish this up, Picard season 3, the first of our new batch of shows to actually finish. Picard's obviously a unique animal. We've kind of covered this over the last couple of years as we've talked about Picard. Each season of Picard is its own animal. They all kind of have a unique perspective and a kind of a storytelling thrust. Season 3 is certainly the one that most consciously embraces the nostalgia, and the bringing back the old TNG vibes. It's been a while since we've talked about it here on Trek Live. It's a year old now. We're coming up on the first anniversary of season 3 of Picard premiering, so maybe it's a good time to kind of think about it through these lenses, as it's been a while now and it's kind of sat in our heads for about a year. How do you think of it as a final season, and how's it kind of settling into the Star Trek kind of picture for you?
I mean, it's I don't know. We could talk about it maybe later, but it's probably one of the best final seasons probably out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it does enough to really not do it does some really good final things with some of the characters we've seen through the series, but I think we got some more final stuff in some of the earlier seasons with some of those characters, and I think I think it does the typical one last ride really well, and I don't know, it just ends really well. And as a fan of the show, the series, the franchise, I think it's definitely one of the best, and I can't say enough about it because I think it's really a consensus out there that I think it's
pretty well liked.
Pretty well liked and cited as the best episode of the year or season of the year, which I might argue there, but
Mhm.
I think it's really good and is the best. I don't know what else to say. I'm
Yeah,
just blabbering on.
I think the thing it does so well is it kind of walks the line, which was going to be the challenge, I think, from taking on the we're going to give the last ride to these TNG characters, making it feel like a finale for them, but also making it feel like because of where it's situated, I think it's kind of really important. We talked about this last week with like what would we like to see if we were going to continue it. We're like at the perfect point if we wanted to push forward like that portion of the Star Trek timeline, like the 25th century. Like there's nothing there until we get to Discovery season 3. So it wraps up these. It gives a really satisfying finale to these TNG characters while still keeping the door kind of cracked open if you wanted to do something else. But it also like alludes to like the next generation. It's Seven as a captain. It's Rafi. It's Jack Crusher. It's Sidney LaForge. It's giving excitement for what's to come as well as like just looking back. It's not one or the other. Where it could have been. I think it could have. I think one of the things that people were afraid of, with especially between seasons 2 and 3, there was some consternation, understandably, and I get it, and I still kind of feel that way. If you were a big fan of Picard seasons 1 and 2, the decision to kind of offload Alison Pill and Santiago Cabrera as those key characters in the first 2 seasons, Isa Briones, these actors who were really important in the first couple of seasons, to accommodate the TNG cast, is it just going to be about, is this TNG season 8? Is this going to kind of take the eye off of everything Picard was and just be concerned with giving these characters who have been around for so long one more thing? And I don't think the show did that. I think it found a way to do that, but to also honor, the continuing on of that part of the Star Trek calendar per se, and it makes it exciting for people to talk about something like Star Trek Legacy, where people want that. They want to see it continue and see these characters that are, around and well, and at a point in their careers where you can continue to see them and want to. I think the show did a really nice job of that, and I think what we alluded to earlier with talking about Voyager and what we kind of wished Endgame was able to do, I think this finale does that. I think not taking the kind of climax of the season right up until the end of the last episode and allowing for some downtime to like have an epilogue to live with these people for a minute at the end, to get to see them, post crisis, and have an idea of what it's going to look like on the other side, is really helpful and makes it feel more cathartic to like have that ending. And I think that's a big lesson, that kind of talking about Discovery season 5 and how that ends. I hope there's a way to do that. I hope it doesn't end too abruptly, where you don't feel like you get that, like everybody's okay. You have an idea of like, what are they going to be doing? What's happening to these people? I think that's important. I think that's a lesson that Voyager especially kind of left us, and Picard season 3 as kind of an antidote to that taught us for sure. Like, I think we need that.
I think that's why there's so much hesitation, at least for me.
Right.
But no, I think you're right, Bill. I think we cracked the code. I think to really do a good ending, like you got to have some final stuff with some of these characters, but you also have to really, put some hope and faith in the future and what it is and what these characters could go on and do.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what Picard does so well. And I think that's what, going back a little bit, TNG does so well. Ending the show itself is, there's hope for the future, but also there's some final stuff in that episode. So I think that's really the recipe for a successful ending.
Right.
Giving some room to breathe. Obviously, you mentioned it, giving an act with these kind of characters, but also really hopeful for the future, and then really give these characters some time in their light and give them some flowers. And so I think
Mhm.
if they can do all that, I think it'll be successful. Which I think, at least for my money, Picard does
Yeah.
well.
I think the finales that work the best for me, All Good Things, for me, What You Leave Behind, does for the most part do this. And you're a little more mixed on aspects of it for sure. And then The Last Generation from Picard is, in the case of All Good Things, like if All Good Things was the last time we saw the TNG characters, I think it would have still been a great finale. It would have been satisfying. It would have been heartfelt.
Yes.
It would have felt like that was great, and they're going off on new adventures. But it felt like there was a culmination there. Something important happened there. Picard sitting down at the poker table, having that moment, felt like a big deal. I think the last generation ends at a point where if we get Legacy, great. If we get some version of a continuance, whatever that is, awesome. If we don't, I've kind of grown to be of the opinion that if that's it, and that's great. I think it ends. It does the same thing All Good Things does. There's a hope for the future. They're there in our heads. You kind of can picture what people are doing. Everybody can have their version of it. And if we ever get back around to it, great. And if we don't, that works okay too. Same thing with What You Leave Behind. I think the thing that hurts Endgame in that respect is it's not as satisfying. Like it leaves you just wanting more. It doesn't feel as like as satisfying. It feels like there's a missing component at the end of it, and that's what I think is really important. I think that's what makes a finale in this world, especially with Star Trek, really going to work or not. I think that's the challenge that Discovery is running against, and that I think that's going to be for me the sort of litmus test for like, is it a great finale or is it a good last episode? Because I think Endgame's a good last episode. I think they're really good things within Endgame. I think the episode itself, I think Kate Mulgrew is amazing in Endgame. I think there are moments in it that are really strong. I think Janeway asking Chakotay to sit at the helm and fly, or like there's emotion even in those last moments. I think it's like the production is strong, but it's not a satisfying like last taste, you know.
Same with These Are the Voyagers. Like we get this great moment with we get so many great moments in there, I guess.
Yeah, with Archer and T'Pol and
with Archer and T'Pol
at the end.
And a few of these other characters, but I think just like as a whole, I think you're right. I think there's when you leave things on the table and when you leave fans wanting more. I mean, again, as fans we're always going to want more, but I think something that big, I think, is a recipe for not a great ending, and then you run the risk of of really changing people's perspective on the show, and then it, like Deep Space Nine and like Voyager, I think you get kind of overshadowed by some of these other shows, and then it takes years to kind of recover from that. So
right,
it's tough.
Yeah, no, for sure. Rob's asking the question of the day, which is why we're here, I think, is do you have faith that Discovery will give us a satisfying finale? I do. One of the things that came out this last week was the Saturn Awards. Doug Jones was there, and if you follow sites like Trek Movie, they were there, and they were interviewing all these people. And Doug Jones, the way he phrased the reshoots, like in talking about it in the interview, was that it's for an epilogue at the end of the last episode. Now, that's a broad term, and how that doesn't tell us anything about the effectiveness of it, how satisfying it's going to be, but
that could be 30 seconds, that could be 30 minutes.
Yes.
So yeah.
Right. So that doesn't tell me anything as far as like really setting my mind at ease, but what does give me some degree of assurance is that that's the kind of thing that I think will be important to making it feel satisfying. I think at the end of What You Leave Behind, getting to see them all in Vix and listen to Vic sing The Way You Look Tonight is important. Like that is what makes that gives that some of that flavor is there in that moment. When I hear that song now, I think of that. And so like that kind of a thing is important in these finales. And hearing that it is an epilogue gives me hope, but it also makes me cautious. Like I got to see it, but I have hope. I do have hope. And I think we mentioned earlier, Rob, that I think each, other than maybe season 2, each season of Discovery, because of the structure of the show being kind of a season-long arc, they had to, in order to wrap up the arc of the season, there is some sense of finality at the end of these seasons. I think season 4 has a kind of almost a finale kind of a feel to it. Would it be a great series finale? No, I don't think it would be, but there is that vibe of finality going on. So I do think it'll have an air of it. Whether how emotionally satisfying it'll be is the open question as a true series finale. I do real quick because we're going long here. This is definitely our longest episode in a little bit. I want to go real quick to a different view on our YouTube channel here. It's going to put up our ranks of these seasons. We did this kind of on a whim. We have the same 1 and 2 and the same number 6. And the sort of middle of our list is all... We have the same number 4 too, but that's where our difference is. Basically TNG and DS9 at 3 and 5. We have flipped around. I have DS9 season 7 as my number 3.
And again, that could be recency bias here because it's been maybe 2, 3 years since I've seen Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm.
I just finished The Next Generation.
Yeah.
So and also on the heels of Picard.
Yes.
So that I think that's where you're seeing that a little bit for me at least.
And to be fair, there's a lot of episodes of TNG season 7 as we talked about last week, or maybe the week before, when you put up your ranks. Like you were fond of some episodes that maybe some other people aren't as fond of. You like Emergent, you like Masks, you like Eye of the Beholder. Some of the episodes that people kind of hang season 7 out to dry on are not negatives for you. So I think that's fitting. And I remember we spent a lot of time when you last rewatched Deep Space Nine on season 7, and you're kind of struggled with some of it. So you were not. You've never been a huge fan for how that wraps. So I think that reflects you well. I think that sounds right. That's probably, if we were doing it against each other's, I think I probably would have gotten it maybe right. Maybe I would have flipped 3 and 4 for you on my guess. But pretty close. Enterprise season 4 was my favorite final season up until 2023. I think Picard season 3 is my choice as a TNG lover. I think what it provides me as like a satisfying conclusion that kind of cures some of the pain of Nemesis is pretty special, and it sits pretty comfortably at the top of my list. But I think both of these reflect what we just talked about. I think are what we said as we talked about each one of these feels appropriately linked to how this looks on these lists. Anything you want to add to kind of? I
just think that where we are this is a very important episode, I think, for Trek Live, because where we are at in the franchise and with some of these other shows, if you think about it, like if we're committed to the 5 seasons model, Strange New Worlds at its middle point.
Yeah.
Where's Lower Decks at? There's some finality maybe with
coming
Prodigy, some Lower Decks final season maybe. I don't know. I don't want to speak that into existence. I want The Simpsons. We're going to do 20 whatever episodes
for real
or seasons. So I think it's really important because I think right now there's a lot of potential final moments with some of these shows. So I think this is a very important episode. So
this list could grow. Yeah, which is a shame because I don't want any of those shows to end. I don't want Prodigy to end. I don't want Lower Decks to end.
No.
I sure don't want Strange New Worlds to end anytime
I don't want Discovery to end.
I don't want Discovery to end. I really, really don't.
Yeah.
I was counting on Discovery going 7. I felt like let's go back to that number would be like perfect for Discovery, for Strange New Worlds, like these flagship kinds of shows. Yeah, with 10 episodes, 7 feels like the least we could do. So pretty disappointed. Obviously, I'm still kind of reeling from Discovery kind of wrapping. But when I look at like my spreadsheet and I see 65 episodes at the end of that 5th season, that's a good chunk of Star Trek in this day and age. That's a lot of content. That's 65 new episodes of Star Trek that weren't there a few years ago. And I'm pretty confident. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with this, and I'll get hung from the highest poll in some corners of the internet. But I think Discovery is going to age well. I think there are people out there who, It might take some time, but we'll come around. Not everybody. I'm not here to say, oh, everybody's going to eat their words. Not everybody ate their words on Enterprise or Voyager, and I'm not here to tell anybody they're right or wrong. If that's how you feel, that's how you feel. But I do feel like, as I've seen with Voyager, with Enterprise, I think as these shows age into completed entities that are sitting out there to be watched as full-fledged, Star Trek shows that have some years on them, I think it'll help them in the esteem of some. And, yeah, I wish it wasn't ending, but I'm kind of almost looking forward to getting to watch Discovery as a full show as well.
With bookends. Yeah.
Yeah.
The discussion does not have to stop here. The discussion does not have to end. Twitter, Blue Sky, the Discord server, all great places to keep the discussion going, no matter what show you want to talk about, no matter what book you want to talk about. It's not up to the literary universe to fill in, to make the endings of some of these shows better. It's up to we got to hold that to the showrunners and the writers. So and us as Star Trek fans, keep
The books are
discussion
bonuses.
going. Yeah, exactly. So we'll be back again in 2 weeks to talk about more Star Trek. But I want to thank everybody for watching. Thank Rob, who's in chat.
Yeah, appreciate
for
your feedback,
stopping
Rob.
in. And we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.